On this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're going to talk coordinators. The Eagles have a brand new offensive and defensive coordinator. What is going to be different about the schemes in 2023 versus 2022? All that and more on this Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Shout out to the everydayers, Monday through Friday. Yes, even in May, for tuning in to your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, Locked On Eagles, as always, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Gino, we are officially in the dead zone of the offseason, man. Now that the schedule came out last week, there is really nothing to look forward to until training camp outside of the Kelly Green jerseys. So I thought today we'll talk some coordinators, right? I mean, there's a lot that's going to be different about this 2023 Eagles team. There's a lot that's going to be the same. One of the key differences is there's going to be two brand new coordinators on offense and defense. So I thought we'd talk about the differences because I think with both Desai and Johnson, there's going to be a lot of similarities from what Steichen and Gannon did, but I think there will be some key differences too. And I think more differences probably with Desai on defense than Johnson on offense, since Brian Johnson was already with the Eagles in 2022.
You also have to account for the fact that Sean Desai is taking over what is going to look like a completely different defense for the majority of the part when it comes to personnel.
Sure. Good point.
So it's not going to look a lot like what the guy before him. I'm just not going to even talk. He's Voldemort, in my opinion.
He who shall not be named. That's good.
Yeah, he who shall not be named. What Sean Desai is going to bring, though, Lou, that the other guy didn't, is experience behind some big name coaches. I mean, he was there with Fangio. He was there with Pete Carroll. He has been around and has experience in this type of role. The one who shall not be named came into that role and never had any experience outside of being a position coach. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most, is that the guys that have been sharpened, the size of the world, right? And Brian Johnson, it's his first time calling plays in the National Football League, but he's done it at a college level, at a high level in the SEC. Those situational areas when it comes to when should we blitz, when should we do the bend, not break, having an idea of those times where it looked like Gannon didn't have the upper hand when it came to the opposing coach. I think Sean Desai is going to be one of those guys that you say he can win this coaching battle Monday through Saturday. And then when Sunday comes, you see the results because he's so refined when it comes to his situational awareness, his understanding of players and personnel. And you look at that Seahawk group last year, Lou, when it comes to names, when it comes to talent, you weren't looking at that group and saying, oh, this is the Legion of Boom of 2010s. This is a group that
they were all young players,
all younger guys, athletes, and guys that were still trying to find their actual roles in the NFL. And they put together one of the better defenses in the National Football League. So you're saying, can he do more with less? Well, now that he has more, can he do what the other guy didn't and put those guys in a fantastic position to get the upper hand? But even he said it himself, is that last year's defense was historic. You have to set personal goals for what you want in Desai. And I think just not being as bad as the other guy is going to be a win, according to a lot of people.
Yeah. And I would say statistically, their defense probably will not be as good as last year without Javon Hargrave and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and, without TJ Edwards and Kazir White for sure. But I think you're upgrading when it comes to the coordinator, when it comes to preparation and context and like specific plans for specific teams. So I think that, again, you'll probably see a regression when it comes to the numbers, but I think I'll feel a lot better about the defense this year with Desai than Gannon. And the other thing I love that you said right at the end when you were talking about the Seahawks defense, he put these players in positions, to succeed. And that's the one thing that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson quote tweeted on Twitter, and he deleted it after, but he said when Gannon was talking about the Super Bowl loss, CGJ quote tweeted Gannon's press conference and said, you did not put us in a position to make plays. And so that's the key. That Seattle Seahawks defense had the guys you're referring to. Tariq Woolen was a 5th-round rookie that was a Rookie of the Year finalist. I mean, look at Kobe Bryant. Was a defensive back from Cincinnati. That was a day 3 selection. Of course, they had Quandre Diggs, but they had a lot of young players in that secondary that Desai got the most out of. So I think he's going to be a more hands-on coach that way. I think his game planning and his in-game situational play calling will be a whole lot better. So I think when it comes to like actual personnel, Gino, some differences. One thing that I actually thought about the other day, I think you're going to see a lot more 3 safety looks. You really did, and maybe it was more personnel than Gannon's preference. I think it was a little bit of both, but you're going to, I think, go back to the Jim Schwartz days where you see a lot more 3 safety looks, where I think, yeah, Morrow's going to have a big part at linebacker, Nicholas Morrow, who you signed in for agency, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if you see Terrell Edmunds, Sidney Brown, and Reed Blankenship all out there a lot of the time at the same time with your 3 corners too.
I think it's going to be smart because first things first, you got to take away the pass in the National Football League.
Right. That's one thing that's not going to change with Desai, right?
Right. So you want to improve the ability to take away the run game. It might hurt you if you go into those 3 safety looks, but I agree. That's what Seattle loved to do. They love to go defensive back heavy, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
They never really had stud linebackers and probably going to get a upgrade at that linebacker position from what Desai had last year in Seattle. And you're coming into this year and saying, I have guys up front who I could use in coverage as well with that Sam linebacker role, right? I mean, what are you going to be able to do with Nolan Smith, deploy him in those areas? So it's going to be a lot of, I would say, diverse functionality with these players, that they're not just going to have that one set given role, which it seemed that Gannon at first was a lot more creative. And then towards the end of the year, last year, he was very set in his ways. He's going into the same looks up front, the same looks on the back end. He wasn't disguising anything. You're going to get more disguises. You're going to get more looks that are going to say, okay, offensive coordinator, you're going to have to adjust for this in game because the look that we presented to you on tape the last couple of weeks, that's going to be different. Yeah. The personnel that we deployed the last couple of weeks, it'll probably be different. Where you see those guys deployed, Lou, I think will take the ultimate jump, right? There will be times when Nakobe goes into coverage, when Terrell Edmunds comes down and he's blitzing off of the opposite edge. They're going to do things like that. And Sean Desai has the resources to do that now, which last year in Seattle, he did a good job with, but you're not going to say that this group right now is deeper than what he had in Seattle. I mean, you actually are going to say that. You wouldn't have said the opposite, rather. But he has so much talent when it comes there. And above everything else, Lou, he has athletes on that position. You have to use them in a multitude of different ways because they're going to be all over the field. And guys like Nakobe and guys like Terrell Edmunds, Reed Blankenship, and now Sidney Browns, those guys want to fly around on the back end.
And Edmunds and Blankenship, Gino, they also played in the box a lot. When you look at what Edmunds did in Pittsburgh, when you look at Blankenship, what was his strength last year as an undrafted rookie? I thought tackling was a huge part of it, against the run. So I think you can probably feel comfortable using 3 safety sets more and not feel like you're going to get screwed against the run. And, the other thing why I think there might be a more reduced role when it comes to the 2 linebackers, not Nakobe Dean specifically, but more like last year, it was TJ Edwards and Kazir White played almost every snap, every single game, right? Whereas this year, Morrow's definitely going to have a role, especially as he probably fills the role of TJ Edwards more. But I think he'll come off the field more than those 2 guys did. It's because of those 3 safety looks, but also not only do you now have Haason Reddick, who is that Sam spot, but you also have Nolan Smith. And I think there's going to be times they want to use both of them out there at the same time together where you can rush both. But then it makes the offense figure out more like, okay, which one of these guys is coming? Because now we know both can drop back as well and wear many different hats. Keeps the offense thinking. So not only will there be an increased role with more safeties, but that Nolan Smith, Haason Reddick dynamic, I think you'll also see implemented more too.
And if you have ever heard the term total football, this was created probably 50 years ago by Johan Cruyff out of the Netherlands. And the idea that guys on a soccer pitch can play all positions. A defensive player can be an attacking player. An attacking player can come back and drop into defense. That's what modern defenses in the National Football League are looking for, right? I'm doing some tape study right now on Josh Uche from the New England Patriots. Not only is he an unbelievable speed rusher off the edge who can move inside and out with his unbelievable foot quickness, but he's a guy who's dropping into coverage 10 to 15 yards. And that's the greatness of guys like Belichick, right? And that's what you hope Desai can pick up on from the Fanjos, is that at no given time, does the opposing team know what you are going to do? And if they do, we're going to give you a different look. And that's ultimately what I think Desai is going to bring that Mr. Hardhead, Jonathan Gannon, didn't really do towards the end of his tenure.
I agree for sure. Again, personnel wise, they're just as talented. Maybe they take a little bit step back this year because they are younger. But I think when it comes to the coordinator, I'm more confident that they're in better hands with Desai over Gannon. How different is the offense going to be now that Shane Steichen's the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, building around Anthony Richardson? Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, is now the OC. We'll get into that and more on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's show is presented by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs. And I know I'm so sorry I brought up the NBA right now on a Philadelphia sports podcast since the 76ers blew it in Game 7, and yet another year they lose in the second round. But hey, the NBA playoffs still exciting. The conference finals, Heat Celtics, and I love me some Los Angeles Lakers against the Denver Nuggets. Bet on it all at FanDuel, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So it's a safe, secure app. You get paid instantly. There's great promotions every day. It's been so much fun for me. I'm such a basketball head. But right now, hockey as well. You can bet on the NHL. The Las Vegas Knights moving on the other day, beating the Edmonton Oilers. No better place for all playoff action at America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA, the NFL, and now the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Eagles fans, we are continuing on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks for making us a part of your day, your first listen every day. Shout out to the everydayers, even in the dead zone of the offseason. Gino and I still going strong Monday through Friday. Today, we're talking about the differences that we could see on offense and defense from 2022 to 2023. Now that they have two new coordinators, Brian Johnson on offense and Sean Desai on the defensive side of the ball. Defense, Gino, we both agreed when it comes to Desai's philosophy over Gannon will be different. I think personnel is a lot different too. So you'll see some definitely, strategic and I should say, schematic differences in 2023. On offense, I think there will be some differences, but definitely not as much. Brian Johnson, even in his press conferences a few weeks ago, said it was going to be a pretty seamless transition for him, right? And he knows what Jalen Hurts does best. I think they utilized that perfectly last year. So if it isn't broken, don't fix it. So do you think there's going to be any key differences here? I think there will be some, but again, I think Johnson will probably want to run it back pretty much the way it was structured last year. I mean, why not?
Our friend Brennan Olson over at Locked On Gators.
Yeah.
We've talked to him about Brian Johnson a bunch, and he says he loves the vertical game and he loves running his quarterback. So if you hear that, you should be pretty excited with the evolution that our quarterback, Jalen Hurts, man, that's who he is, right? Now that he has that long ball in his game, I think they're going to just try to continue to open that up as well.
I agree.
Now with more looks when it comes to the running back or the quarterback run game, I think you got to continue to use what you have, but out of necessity, right? Out of necessity when needed.
Right.
Because he did have quarterbacks at Florida. I mean, he was there with a year for AR, for goodness sake. When you have that quarterback who's that good of an athlete, you can't take that away. But Brian Johnson, what is going to be the best part about him, Lou, isn't that he's going to change many things, if anything, at all. And that's the best part. You're not going to change the language when it comes to the quarterback. You're not going to have to change the playbook. He's not going to have to install completely new offense that he's bringing from college, let's say, right? There was never that set, I would say, just way to define an offense when Carson was here, right? After Frank Reich left, it was changeover after changeover after changeover. That's tough on a quarterback and an offense.
Well, Jalen Hurts said that himself last year. Gino, he was excited about 2022 because this is the first time I'm in back-to-back years having the same offense. And so it's cool that this year he's got year 3, even with a new coordinator. It's his guy and it's somebody that was with the team last year. So it's going to be the same thing. That's so important. I mean, that's a huge reason he took an MVP step last year.
And Brian Johnson knows the strengths of the players in the offense. He knows the strengths of Jalen Hurts better than probably anybody, right? And he will hold them all accountable too. I think that's a big talking point when it comes to holding your quarterback accountable, because after 2017, what happened? It was always like, oh, I'll find a way to fix it. But when you want to fix something, if you're not doing it, you're not holding yourself accountable. And that's inevitably what led to the downfall of Carson Wentz. Jalen Hurts knows that he wants to continue to get better. I think Brian Johnson knows areas that they can continue to uncover when it comes to his strengths, and just the cohesiveness that they have there. Let's hope that it's not just a one and done type of year, because technically you're going into the third year of this offense, right? And
Yeah.
that's the bad part about having these great personnel groups on offense and defense, is that even a guy like the one who shall not be named is up for a coaching candidacy because these guys are making unbelievable plays and you just happen to be a part of that, right? And with these two, if they can get more out of this offense, let's say Jalen does throw for more than 4,000 yards and sets the franchise record, right, Lou? How are other teams not saying, okay, we have to take a look at this guy?
Oh, they will. Jeffrey Lurie himself, I think, said that he thinks Brian Johnson will be a coaching candidate next year. And he was already, the NFL was eyeing him this past offseason. So they were going to lose him if they didn't make him, like, let's say Steichen didn't get a head coaching job. Gino, Brian Johnson was going to be somewhere else in the NFL calling plays in 2023. So, yeah, I think a lot of it will be the same, and that's a good thing. I think you'll utilize Jalen Hurts' running style just as much. I think they'll pick and choose their spots. I think a little more specific this year than last year. I think one thing you'll see too, Gino, probably more of an emphasis in throwing the football, right? Not that they're going to totally abandon the run game, but last year there were still a lot of games where they were a run-heavy team, and it obviously worked, and it was much fewer than 2021 when it comes to the amount of games. But this year, especially when you see what Jalen Hurts did last year, I mean, just look at the Super Bowl itself. You know that he can handle throwing at a high volume with high efficiency, and you look at all the weapons he's got, I definitely think they're going to throw the football even more.
I don't think they take it out of his hands, man. That's exactly what I want. I want to see him continue to throw. And what could his ceiling really be? Could you improve his accuracy this year? Could his deep ball numbers continue to skyrocket, right? I mean, do you find more ways to get Devontae Smith open downfield just to complement what you do with AJ down the field? Do you open it up more with OZ and Quez Watkins now that you have maybe a four-man combination where you're able to get more out of these guys rather than just having a Zach Pascal who's your short intermediate blocking guy, and every time Quez is on the field, you know, he's a deep ball receiver. You could throw a change-up pitch in there. You're going to bring more when it comes to the tight end pass game. You're going to bring more when it comes to the running back pass game as well.
That so for sure. It's going to be a lot more passes to the running back.
Yeah, and look at the running backs that they've had at Florida, man. I mean, there's one that almost beat you down in Houston last year that was in that offense with Brian Johnson a couple of years ago. They know how to use those guys, man. They know how to use them in a multitude of different ways and can get them going in a multitude of different avenues. And you're going to do that because Brian Johnson knows exactly what makes this offense click, which if you're looking at the running game, Lou, where we're saying continue to pass, your running game is scripted by Jeff Stoutland, who is the best guy to do it in the National Football League right now because he has the best offensive line. So bring in some new ideas from Brian Johnson from what he had at college, continue to work that in when it comes to the backfield, and continue to exemplify what this league is, and that's passing the football. And if they can continue to get those explosive play numbers up, not just in the run game, Lou, but in the pass game as well, what is the ceiling with this offense? That's what I want to know.
The ceiling of the entire team extremely high in 2023. And, you know, a huge part of that too is the conference the Eagles are in right now. And we've talked about this a few times on the show, but now that we have the schedule out and we're kind of looking at after the draft and free agency, what these teams look like in the NFC, we know Lamar Jackson's not coming over. We know Aaron Rodgers is now officially a New York Jet. I want to talk about the outlook of this conference, not just in 2023, but in the future. Like, the Eagles are Super Bowl contenders, but who are they going to be battling with long-term if Jalen Hurts keeps this up? Other teams across the NFC. All that and more to wrap up this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, Eagles fans, we are wrapping up this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles, and I want to talk some NFC, Gino, because I think in 2023, it's obvious who's going to be the Eagles' competition. In the NFC East, we know it's going to be the Dallas Cowboys again, and I'm not sure. I think the Giants will probably take a step back, in my opinion, but you know, outside of the division, the San Francisco 49ers are probably, even with their unknowns at quarterback, probably the second best team in this conference that are maybe the only other team you'd say that has a legitimate chance at winning a Super Bowl. And then there's some scrappy, good but not great teams like Seattle and Detroit. And I think that'll be Chicago and maybe New Orleans and, you know, Carolina, who knows. But there's, outside of, again, the Eagles, there aren't really any other teams you can say slam dunk. Like, I'd pick that team to win a Super Bowl. Maybe it's San Francisco. Do you agree with that? Probably, right? I mean, I don't know who would be that third team that becomes a championship contender this year.
That's the question that is up in the air for me, right? Because if
Like,
we're
does Seattle
going,
have that ceiling? I don't know.
but if we're going by our paradigm that it has been relatively the same, Lou, over these years,
Yeah.
are we saying that Jared Goff, Geno Smith, are those guys going to
Derek
win you
Carr,
a Super Bowl? Derek Carr,
Kirk Cousins. I mean,
we would never put the stamp on them and say yes. Do they have a defense to the caliber of San Fran where we're saying you can overcome the quarterback position because your defense could be a once in a generation type of scheme now with Javon Hargrave in there as well? Who knows how good they can be? But yeah, Seattle adds JSN, but is that enough? Detroit added Jahmyr Gibbs. Is that enough? Is what they have on defense when it comes to Aiden Hutchinson, is he going to take that jump? I don't see another team being there. And this is why I get upset at the Howie Roseman is too good at his job conversation that people get mad about. No, what Howie Roseman is good at is capitalizing on windows. And when is the best time and the best team that he has had in the best window? It's arguably been last year and this year. So those other teams, that's on them for not capitalizing. I see what the Giants are doing. I just don't think the quarterback position is going to compete with the AFC. I mean, the teams in the South, outside of the Saints right now, is Tampa going to be good enough? No, in my opinion. Is Atlanta going to be good enough? Not in my opinion. Are those young teams with Justin Fields, could they be better? Absolutely. But are they going to be good enough? Are they going to get from that good to great? I don't see it outside of San Francisco. Dallas, just because what Dak Prescott is at the quarterback position as opposed to the rest, I would take him over the field.
But that's a team that has a history of choking. I mean, they're the James Harden. I'm so sorry, Sixers fans, but they're the James Harden of
Toronto 76ers.
Yeah, they're the Leafs. Like, that's Dallas in the NFL. So it's hard to, when you look at them on paper and their track record over the past years, they're a good team that's going to be in the mix. But we always know what the result's going to be. So, Gino, you're right. When you look at the past blueprint of who jumps into the next, slate of contenders, I don't know which team in the NFC has.
Here's one for you.
Path.
I got one for you. What about Green Bay? What if Jordan Love takes that step? He's an athlete.
That was what I was going to say, Gino, is it might not be this year, but let's say in a few years, who's that next Super Bowl contender? It's one of those teams you think, and there's not a lot of them because there's not a lot of good young quarterbacks in the NFC, but it's really which team gets that next quarterback to take an MVP step. And those veterans, like Dak Prescott, to me, is not going to be an MVP candidate suddenly. I don't think Derek Carr will be that suddenly, or Kirk Cousins, but it could be. To me, it's probably Chicago with Justin Fields. Now you get him DJ Moore. I think that could be a team, not this year, but maybe this year or in 2 years that takes that step. It could be Carolina with Bryce Young. Could be Jordan Love, like you said, in Green Bay. Or I think, man, it might just be whoever gets Caleb Williams next year. I mean, let's say the Arizona Cardinals get the first and second overall pick. They trade Kyler Murray and start over with Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that's the path where another NFC team rises up, because these other teams are just really settling with that good, not great tier of signal callers.
Unless New Orleans realizes that the best quarterback in the room is Jake Haener, they're not going to for the next couple of years. But no, you're 100% correct, Lou, and I think the now also suits the later as well. Like, who are those quarterbacks you think could give a run with Jalen Hurts? Jordan Love, man, he stepped right into that game and right on cue. He stepped into the role that Green Bay has now set him up with an even more polished offense, in my opinion, with the guys that they bringing those two good tight ends. You bring in Reed from Michigan State. He's going to fill right in there with Christian Watson. There's a ceiling that I could see them getting to, just like with Chicago. I can see them getting to that ceiling now.
I think Fields will be at the end of the year, Gino. I think people will say Fields is the second best quarterback in the NFC. And again, it's not a high bar to set, but that trio's good now. You've got DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Chase Claypool. You've got Khalil Herbert in the backfield. They upgraded on offense, the offensive line with Peter Skoronski. Their defense needs a lot of work for sure. Like, they're not going to make an Eagles step in 2022 where they're a Super Bowl team, but I think Justin Fields could take that step. So, yeah, I mean, you even look at 2017, those 3 years where they were running it back after the Super Bowl win, and that year they were competing for a championship. That window in the NFC was definitely tighter because you had Drew Brees still in the NFC. You had Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. The Seattle Seahawks were really good still. Russell Wilson was at the top of his game. San Francisco was still loaded with their roster.
Mhm.
The good thing is this time, like, yeah, the Eagles were able to get through that and win a championship. This year they have that roster, and like you were saying before, there's just those teams aren't there this year.
They're not there. And
they're all in the other conference.
We would be talking out of both sides of our mouth if we're just going to try and prop up what the rest of the NFC is. And frankly, it's not there. And that's why we're so excited with the quarterbacks that you get to face in the AFC this year, because those are the ones that you're saying, okay, the AFC is a loaded conference. Everybody's trying to get better at quarterback there. Baltimore couldn't pay Lamar enough. Aaron Rodgers, I mean, they could have paid just about anything to get him into New York. And why is that, Lou? Because there's no more important position on the football field than the guy throwing the football.
100%. Eagles are set up pretty nicely for 2023. We will continue to talk birds all throughout the week right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Subscribe wherever you get the show. We're also available on YouTube and on Twitter as well, at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase LOE, and at GC24_football. Until Tuesday, that'll do it. Shout out to the everydayers. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.